Hello and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Robin Leonard. I'm going to be going through the ROI of Customer Experience. This is something I'm super excited to talk about. It's maybe I say ROI about 1,000,000 times every single day. It's really the focus for what we all should be thinking about with making cloud, CX, CRM, marketing automation, all of these customer experience initiatives that we put in place to build a smarter customer journey. We need to start considering what's the ROI, because obviously you can do a lot of work with your cloud technology that results in no tangible ROI, and it can leave board directors and decision makers that hold the purse strings wondering, where did all that money go for our digital transformation? What have we got to show for it? What are we doing in the future that is going to generate ROI? So there is some science behind the madness, and what I'm here to do is really to inform everybody about the way we've been working very happily with our clients to help them understand what is the ROI of their customer experience initiatives. So without further ado, I'm going to launch into this presentation. So we are live. If you do have any questions, please ask them. I should see them and I can respond. So really excited to get this show underway. Great. Well, let's crack into it. So what is the problem with the ROI of CX? So firstly, it's not easy to measure ROI from CX investments. There isn't really an obvious way of doing that. It's not like out of the box, you do a project and there's ROI that pops up on the screen and says, you've delivered this much ROI. You've actually got to intentionally do it. A lot of the ROI tracking that is done is usually done informally. So usually there'll be a documented business case. If a company is organized enough, they will document their business case in a document or in a presentation. And then years later, no one knows that it actually existed. The people that are using it don't have access to the business case. Nobody is held accountable for the estimates in the business case. And there's no look back. Even benefit realization, which has been a big word that's gone around for a long time, doesn't really exist in reality. A lot of organizations say, oh, once we realize the benefits, but to realize a lot of benefits, sometimes you actually need to let go of people to realize a benefit. Otherwise, those people, they don't get fired. They usually get repositioned into doing other productive work. So it's very difficult to actually get tangible ROI from your investments. So this is hopefully what we're going to answer. Often we also think about CX initiatives as intuitive. So when we think about a brand experience, we know that there should be a welcome journey. We know that there should be an onboarding journey. We know there should be a re-engagement journey. We know that the front end of the website or the login experience needs to be crisp and clean and modern. We know that's required, but why? What is the difference between my 10-year-old front-end website versus my modern front-end website? What if that costs $1 million to create a really beautiful web experience versus the old experience? How do we measure the difference? How do we know that there's actually a tangible benefit in doing that project? And if we don't know what the benefit could be and we don't know how to track it, why do it in the first place? And that's really why we're here. There's also typically most organizations, they don't have a process of approving, setting goals and tracking the results. There's just no process. No one's accountable. If you make a journey go live, usually it just sits with the marketing team and everyone's like, oh, great, we've got the journey live. Great. But there's no one that's really responsible for owning the outcome of it. And no one's accountable. No one's going to get fired if the journey doesn't deliver any value. It just is what it is. So these are some major problems that we really want to address. And there is a path forward. There is a solution to these things, but we've actually got to intentionally look for it and try to achieve it. Great. So before I go any further, I would like to tell everyone that there is an upcoming set of events These are live events being held in AICD offices across Australia. AICD is the Australian Institute of Company Directors, and I'm going to be personally running these events in Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, and Brisbane. On these dates shown, there is a link to register. There's a bit.ly link on the slide that if you go to that, you can register for the event in your location. And what we'll be doing is it's really a bit of a networking. So you arrive at the venue, networking, we'll do a short talk around the ROI of customer experience, going into more depth than I'm going into today. Then we'll have some open Q&A, and then there's a morning tea for networking. So please, if this is relevant to you and it's important to you, please register, come along, meet other leaders and directors as we talk about what is the ROI of customer experience. Great. So in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to go through this presentation fairly rapidly around the anatomy of ROI, like what is it? What are your ROI levers? How do you define an ROI hypothesis? How do you think about the ROI that you could potentially gain? How do you track and measure and report on the ROI? And then how to get started. So today is going to be very practical. It's very simple. Once you understand exactly what I'm talking about, it's actually quite simple to take this into your organization and start talking to your business stakeholders around ROI. Otherwise, what are we doing? So firstly, this is the framework. It's fairly straightforward. So the first step is really to understand the anatomy of ROI for your organization. What is it? How do I understand what the levers are for delivering ROI? How do I measure it? How do I quantify it? Step two is to set ROI hypotheses. And these are really assumptions around initiatives where you think, okay, if I were to do this project, I believe I may get this kind of result. So at least you set a hypothesis. You could also think of it like a goal. And finally, how do I report on that? How do I track it? What tracking mechanism do I need to put in place in the organization in order to actually report on this? And all of these things companies aren't doing today. 99% of organizations do not track ROI for their CX initiatives. So we're going to give you a very simple way of doing that. Great. So if we think about the anatomy of ROI, there's four major areas, and obviously there's a lot of different ways you can get ROI from technology. We're really focused around customer experience, but you could say that by doing a customer service initiative, there would be a reduction in the manpower required to service a customer. There's all sorts of different things you can do. We're really focused on the customer experience side. It doesn't mean any other ROI is not relevant. This is the fluffiest area. So this is what we're tackling. This is what we specialize in. And so these four areas, or these four levers, are quite straightforward. And I'll be talking a little bit more about them as we progress. The first is increasing your CRO, or your conversion rates. So as you're acquiring customers, if you have a lead that comes into your top of the funnel, and then it converts all the way down to a paying customer, how do we get that percentage to go from 1% to 2%? Because that actually increases the value of the lead that comes in if we have a higher conversion rate. And I'll talk more about valuing the funnel in the future slides. Reducing the CAC, or the customer acquisition cost, is another lever. And if you think about your CAC as the total amount you've spent on marketing and acquisition for the year, divided by the total number of customers that you've acquired that year, that's the CAC. It's very simple. If your CAC is more expensive than your customer lifetime value, you are misusing your acquisition funds. So it's really important to understand what the customer acquisition cost is so you can balance it against your actual lifetime value of the customer. The third point, reduce data and compliance breach. So this is a massive one. We often don't take this into consideration when we're talking about ROI, but this is ultimately saying, what is the percentage likelihood that I'm going to have a data breach or I'm going to have a spam breach? And what's the penalty if that happens? How do I reduce that likelihood? So it's relatively simple, but it's all about reduction of risk so that it's less likely. So instead of having a customer data breach one in every 3 years, you could have one in every 5 years. And that would actually, you could consider that a positive ROI by reducing the risk of breach. Finally, increasing the customer spend and looking at, and many marketers will know there's 3 letters, RFM, recency, frequency, and monetary. So if we can help increase the engagement of the customer and stimulate their spending, increase the average basket size, increase how often they buy with you, looking at when was the last time they bought from you and stimulating them to buy more frequently. So that's really the key around customer lifetime value increase, is to play around with RFM to get your customers to buy more and more frequently. So there are very simple 4 levers that you can use to increase customer lifetime value. Great. And if you were to calculate it, how would you calculate customer lifetime value? So this method is very simple. It's really looking at the average payment amount, the average frequency of payment or purchase, the tenure in years for how long a customer stays with your organization on average, and also looking at your customer acquisition cost. And there are several different ways of calculating customer lifetime value. This is quite a simple one. It's average purchase amount or payment amount times frequency times tenure minus CAC. That gives you, and you can see here, it's 4523 times 12 purchases per year times 3.2 years minus $50 CAC, leaves us with $1,687 as a customer lifetime value. So obviously this is just an example. You'd need to do this calculation for your own organization. Every organization is slightly different and you have slightly different data available to you. So you don't have to apply this rigidly if it's not relevant. For example, if all of your customers only ever purchase once per year, then the frequency is just 1. So you can almost ignore the frequency. So there's those considerations. There may be other organizations that don't really have the same kind of model as a retail business, like a bank or an insurance company, where the profitability is actually really confusing compared to purchasing products. So when it's a more custom customer model, you really have to work with your internal stakeholders to align on how do you all agree to measure customer lifetime value. And only then can you then apply that, because some people may disagree internally. So a lot of the customer lifetime value modeling is actually alignment with other team members on a common understanding of customer lifetime value, how to calculate it. Once you've got that, then you can move forward and calculate it for your customers. The reason why customer lifetime value is so important to understand is because it drives the understanding of the value of the entire funnel. So if I know that my customer, if they're a repeat customer, they bought more than once, they are worth $1,687, and I know that I have a 5% conversion rate on my one-time customers becoming repeat customers, then I know that my one-time customers are each worth $84.35 because it's 5%. So all you're doing is you're saying 1,687 times 5% is equal to the value of a one-time customer, and so on and so forth. So if I know that a subscriber converts 2.5% of the time into a one-time customer, then I can also value a subscriber. So it means that if I do any hypotheses, any calculations, I can say, okay, I believe that this initiative will generate 1,000 new subscribers, I can then apply a monetary value to a new subscriber. So yeah, it goes all the way up. The reason this is super important is it allows you to put a value to data, to customer data. It also allows you to very easily see where are my potential levers. So if I were to increase the website visitor to subscriber conversion from 1% to 2%, what would that do? It doesn't affect anything below it, but it affects everything above it. So it means that if that was 2%, then the website visitor value would be 2 cents instead of 1 cent. So it doubles the value of the data up the funnel. Yeah, so that's a very simple way of thinking about it, but it allows you to value the marketing initiatives that you do, even if they don't result in tangible revenue or tangible savings. You can value and put a baseline, and as long as everyone agrees what these numbers are, then it becomes quite a real number for you to tie ROI to. But not all customers are equal. And this is really something that's quite important to understand is, even though I've averaged out all of my customers and I've got this one average amount for all customer lifetime value, it doesn't mean every individual customer is spending that much money. What often happens is that there's a bell curve, and on the left side, you've got a negative number or a zero, and on the right side, you've got a very high number. And you can think about Pareto analysis and say, well, 80% of my revenue comes from 20% of my top customers. If you were to measure the value of your bottom customers, you'd quickly realize, whoa, they cost me more money than they generate. Why have those customers? And that's why it's really important to understand the different segments or different types of customers, do the customer lifetime value modeling for them, and then you can make decisions on what to do next for them. So potentially, if I wanted to, I could either stop selling to these guys that are costing more money than they're making. I could intentionally put a barrier there and say, no, I don't want those kind of customers. And that way, I'd really only be focusing on customers that are delivering a positive ROI. The other thing I could do is I could look to upsell them and cross-sell them. So if I have a whole lot of customers that are sitting there not making me money, and then a few customers that are making money, I can do campaigns to those people and get them to buy more from me. So it's it's possible to be quite intentional once you understand the different segments and different types of customers within your customer database. And this is really the thing that drives a lot of decision makers and a lot of focus around why we should do different CX initiatives. You're either cutting these guys out or you're stimulating them so they become less of a problem. And this is what I've seen with many customers where we've done this analysis on their customer database to see, okay, we know the averages, but what are the different sub-segments within that? And what we've found in several situations is that 50% of their customers are not good customers. 50% of them are inactive. They cost more money to acquire than they do to maintain, than they do generate revenue for you. So it really is an eye-opener for clients when they see their own data and go, whoa, wait, why are our customers not generating positive ROI? It's actually a really big problem. And until you do this analysis, marketers and salespeople, everyone's blind. No one knows really who's a good customer, who's a bad customer. I'm not saying any customer's bad. It's just that some customers don't serve us well. So that's where we have to think, okay, well, what should we do with these guys? Should we bring them up or should we kick them out? And you do that through the life cycle of the customer. And this is an example, customer experience, where we've got our current state customer experience on the top and our ideal future state on the bottom. Many organizations don't have a clue about this or haven't mapped this out and don't have a common understanding of their current state and their desired future state. So this is something that we'd really recommend doing as you're going through your analysis, is to understand what is my actual experience. Um, Another area that's really important to think about is, what is the risk and reward of my customer database? So if I think about my customer database as a financial asset, I actually have a big liability, in the sense that if there's a customer data breach, there's a cost to that breach. And it's usually something like $2.50 per record that's breached. So if you have a million person customer database and it's 2.5 or $2.50 per record breached, that's $2.5 million in liability. If you ask yourself, how much money do I generate from the database? That should be higher than the liability of a breach. Otherwise, why do it? Why have a customer database if it's a bigger liability to the business than you're getting benefit from it? So this is another area to really look hard at your own practices, to say, obviously try and reduce the data breach risk, but what is the liability versus the value? And how do I increase the value so I'm leveraging more of my first party database to drive more value to the business? And it's not easy to tie an ROI to customer data breach reduction, but there are ways of doing it. There's multiple ways of doing it. So you could look at the potential likelihood of having a data breach this year, with or without an initiative. So a common initiative that you do is to set up a zero trust architecture where you don't rely on humans to do the right thing. You don't allow them to download data onto their laptop, take it home to their spouse and muck around with it. You don't allow that. It's zero trust. I'm not saying you don't trust your people. It's just saying that you don't want them to have the risk of having to deal with it. So you integrate your systems so that they don't rely on humans to download and upload safely. That's a simple way. So you can actually reduce the data breach risk. So if you quantify the likelihood of a data breach, and IBM says there's a 27.9% chance that you'll have a data breach every 2 years. That's 1 in 3 almost. So it's very important that you pay attention to this. If you reduce that data breach likelihood and multiply it by the data breach liability amount, you'll actually see a savings there. Even though it's not a tangible savings, even though it's a what-if scenario, it's still a legitimate way to get ROI out of your systems. There is also spam breach risk. So this is where you don't respect the unsubscribes of people. So if I unsubscribe from a brand, if I call a call center and unsubscribe, or go to the website and unsubscribe, or even if I send a contact us form on the website and say, hey, please unsubscribe me from your email database, and the company doesn't register that and doesn't respect that and hold it really importantly, and make sure that you're suppressed from any communications that aren't transactional, you're really at risk of having a spam complaint, which could result in millions of dollars to the organization. So by doing things like having a clear understanding of where your preferences and unsubscribes are mastered, and making sure all the different channels where a customer can tell you, please unsubscribe me, all of those should feed in and update the master. And then all systems that use that preference or that unsubscribe data, they should respect the master as the single source of truth. That way you prevent a data breach, spam breach. A lot of organizations are very risky with how they treat this. A lot of organizations have not made the investment to tie these systems up and make sure they work together. There's a lot of plugins out there. So companies may have multiple email marketing systems that all have their own unsubscribe database. And unless they're synchronized into one master, it's a massive risk. So it's something to be aware of. Yeah, it should be 101, but it's very common that we see organizations that don't have this tied up. So I'm going to move on to how to define an ROI hypothesis. So think about this like a goal, but you're using the customer lifetime value data and other data, things like the spam breach likelihood, the data breach likelihood, what's the cost of my employees if they're doing manual tasks and if I automate that. You're using all of these assumptions to pull together a hypothesis or multiple hypotheses around an initiative. So for example, here's a few here. This is just some examples. Single customer view, single customer view in CRM. What's the hypothesis? We believe that there is a benefit in reducing the likelihood by having a zero trust data architecture. That's got a lifetime. And this is something very important to consider, is that every initiative we do is not forever. It's until you replace it with something else. And in technology world, things move around quickly. So you may only have an initiative or a project outcome in production or live for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. It's really important to think about that, because every year there is a benefit or a saving that you need to then calculate. And there may even be a depreciation or an appreciation of the benefit over time. So you can do this in all sorts of different ways, but it's really about understanding your levers so that you can use those levers in these hypotheses. Without that, it's very hard to have executives approve what your hypothesis is, because it's funny data. And what we really encourage people to think about is when they're making a big CX investment, usually what that means is they're buying a Salesforce, and implementing it and then running it and enhancing it. And throughout that process, there should be efficiency savings by automating manual business processes. There should also be new revenue, new purchases by stimulating people to buy more. And that's your recency, frequency, monetary. We've got costs. So you've got software license costs. You've got partner costs, like AF Digital is a Salesforce partner. And you've got your internal costs. So who is actually using the technology, who's setting it up, who's administering it, who's governing it from the client side? What are the total costs of ownership of having a CX platform? And then we can also think about the intangible benefits. And these may be in customer lifetime value uplift, which you can't really tie to the system per se, but there is a benefit there. And this is what it may look like over time. And you really have to think about this when you're making these investments, is what is the total cost, not just the project, but the people on our side, the partner side, what's the license cost? This is an example where you can see they went live with Salesforce in 2019. And that red line, or the red block, is really the cost, the total cost year on year. You can see that total cost is going up. The green line is the benefit that we estimate from the projects. So you can see that benefit is going up every year. The black is whether it's positive or negative. So you can see in the first year it was negative. So there was not enough benefit to pay for the project or for Salesforce. But as we move through, there's more and more benefit over time. The blue line is the customer lifetime value uplift. This is the annual increase in the spending of the customer. So if we track, in one example, we tracked right at the start before they started Salesforce until after Salesforce, and their lifetime value had increased from $2,300 per customer to $3,000 per customer, and they have 60,000 customers. So that's a $700 increase in the average spend of those customers of their lifetime, before and after. And if you think about $700 times 60,000, it turned out to be tens of millions of dollars of increased spending. But we couldn't attribute that back to Salesforce directly. But what we want to do is put mechanisms in place to track it. All this does is, if we think about this consciously from an initiative perspective, each initiative, we should be able to say, this is what the value is, this is what the cost is, and that allows the business to prioritize what to do next. And obviously, you've got your low-hanging fruit, which are high benefit, low cost. These should be a high priority. You've also got competitive advantage projects, which are high benefit, high cost. these should also be considered as very important because these will give you advantage over your competitors. It's a lower barrier to entry. It's a lot harder to achieve that benefit. But you can also say, oh, well, okay, I thought this would have a big benefit. I can't think of any benefit for this initiative. Therefore, maybe it's a time waster. Maybe it's high cost and low benefit. So don't do it. Or maybe it's low benefit, low cost. And then I call it polishing. It's like you probably want to do it, but it shouldn't be the first thing you focus on because it's not going to move the needle. So the hypothesis really allows us to prioritize initiatives and what to do first. The actual tracking is the hardest part because how do you actually, where do you put it? Who tracks it? Who's responsible for it? One little tidbit I want to give you first is actually to think about using the campaign object in Salesforce. If you're a Salesforce customer, this is a no-brainer, easy way of tracking ROI and it does depend on how you're using Salesforce. You need to be using the accounts, contacts, and opportunities objects in order to get the benefit from this. But if I put someone into a welcome journey, I can also add them to a campaign as a campaign member. And then if they buy something from me through an opportunity, then I can aggregate that onto the campaign object. So you can see in a screenshot here that this is just native Salesforce functionality. It tracks the how many opportunities were open from people that entered that campaign and how many opportunities are won. So this is a great, simple way to track ROI in your Salesforce CRM. It's in every Salesforce CRM org that's Sales Cloud Enterprise Edition. So I'd highly encourage you to look at that. You can do it manually, and this is the way to do it. So you would have an ROI hypothesis for an initiative. You'd have a lifetime, you'd have a project cost, you'd have an annual maintenance cost. So similar to buying a boat, you've got to think about the cost of the boat to buy it. And then every year you assume there's 10% maintenance on having that boat. Everything that you do in technology is the same. Nothing is set and forget. So you've got to think, what's the project, what's the maintenance, and then what's the total? So if that's a 5-year, like one-time implementation, 5-year maintenance, what's the sum of all of that? That's the total cost. And then you can do the same with benefits. What is the initial benefit? What's the benefit per year after that? Is it going down, up? Is it flat? And what's the sum of that benefit over that period? And the ROI is really the total benefit minus the total cost. So very simple. But unless you're doing this somewhere, how are you going to track it? AF Digital has a solution. So we've actually built a custom app inside Salesforce. And this is available if any of our clients are interested in this. We can do a mini project, get you set up with this on your Salesforce org. This is basically a custom data model where you can track your licenses, your initiatives, your hypotheses, and your results. So it's a very simple way of tracking. And if you've got all of your data in Salesforce CRM, if you've got your campaign object being used, super easy because it really closes the loop of your ROI. So if anyone's interested to discuss this, I'd happily talk about this for hours. We also, within the solution, is license lifecycle management. So if you buy a license from Salesforce or from anyone, Microsoft, whoever, there's usually a start date, a renewal date, an annual license fee. There's parent and child licenses, so you can get add-on licenses, all of those kind of things. Where are you tracking those renewals? Where are you tracking that cost? How do you sum up the cost of your licenses? Often IT will probably do this, but in most businesses, there's licenses everywhere. Marketing will have some licenses. IT will have some licenses. There'll be bespoke licenses all across the business. So this allows you to pull it all together and track the renewal dates, track the amounts, track the contracts, track the status. Like, is it in consideration all the way to, is it being decommissioned? On those licenses, we also track the initiatives. So if I've bought Salesforce Marketing Cloud, I can then say, okay, what are my Salesforce Marketing Cloud initiatives that I'm planning to do? And what are the estimates for those initiatives? What is my assumptions around them? So similar to project management, this is a simple way of managing your initiatives against your sales or your license investments in a way that it's easy to prioritize which one is going to have the most benefit. It also provides a feature for hypothesis management. So similar to goals, it's like, okay, I've got this initiative. What are my hypotheses? And you may have multiple hypotheses per initiative. You may say, well, I think this initiative is going to result in customers spending 10% more per transaction. And because it's automating a current manual process, it's going to save 1 day a month of my employee. And that 1 day is worth $1,000 cost to me. So you can pull together multiple hypotheses and sum them up at the initiative level. It also allows you to track the results against the hypotheses. So you can compare your notes and say, I estimated I'd have a $10,000 benefit from this initiative. And when I tracked it, I realized I only got $5,000 benefit. So that was actually not a good estimate, or maybe I estimated incorrectly, and I'll take that into my future estimates and learn from them. And again, if anyone does track this, I'd be really interested to see how you're tracking it and where you're tracking it, because as far as I know, there's not any or many systems that actually allow you to put this data somewhere. Because it's all inside Salesforce CRM, your other sales data, your service data, everything is in Salesforce CRM, so you can pull it all together into this simple model. Great, so how do I get started? It's very simple. The first place to get started is to value your customer database. So if you can meet with your other stakeholders and start asking them, what is my customer lifetime value? How do we measure this internally? Where do we measure it? Who is responsible for measuring it? How do we measure the different segments of customer lifetime value? If you don't have an answer for this today, it means it's not being done. So I would highly encourage you to ask the questions, and hopefully you've got a business intelligence team and you can point it at them and say, guys, we've got a problem. We don't know what our customer lifetime value is. We don't know which of our customers are good and which are bad. We don't know which are costing us money versus making us money. It's crazy important to understand this for your organization. So ask the question. If it's uncertain and it's not tracked, then agree what is the tracking of it. Like, how do we calculate it? What is our formula that all of us agree to? So we can have one number that we show to the board and we say, this is it. Until you've done that, people are going to have different opinions, and it's going to be a moot point. And if you can't figure this out, you can't value your customer funnel. You can't value the lifetime of the customer. So you're really shooting blind unless you have calculated your customer lifetime value. And then I would recommend thinking through logically. I need an ROI hypothesis before a project is approved. Before an initiative is started, I do need to have an estimate. I can't do projects that don't have a benefit. I should not do those projects. I should always have a positive ROI estimate. And then I should prioritize those projects based on what's going to give me the most estimate, not based on what the executive really wants because they are passionate about having a certain feature. It's not about that. It should be about what's driving the most value to the organization. Once I've done the initiative or I'm doing the initiative, I need a method on how to track and report on the ROI actuals. And if no one's doing that, then you're missing a beat. So if you put in a journey and you're like, yeah, it's going to generate $1 million a year, this one automation, but no one checks, who's responsible for checking? Whose job is it for checking what is the ROI from that journey that we've actually got? And there should be a 1 month, a 3 month, a 6 months, and a 12-month look back to say, what did we get from it? This is a common issue. No one is doing this. And then I would recommend activating an ROI steering committee or a steering committee that is really responsible for driving the prioritization of value from your CX initiatives. And if you don't have a steering committee and it's just one guy in marketing, then it's just so hard. It's so hard. You need senior executives that have skin in the game, that do hold the purse strings, they need to be involved in the regular management of the initiatives to get the ROI. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. And it's not okay to not care about this. It's not too detailed for any executive. Board members should be asking, where is the ROI from the budget we gave you for that CX initiative? So I can't state this strongly enough that you do need to have a conscious plan. In the 90s, we used to do this. Remember doing business cases where you would actually do a big technology investment where you needed like millions of dollars to build a CRM. It's a lot easier now. So people are just like, yeah, I'll get a CRM like that. Easy. Don't need to spend money on. Great. A lot of people are haphazard with their CX investments and initiatives, but they shouldn't be. They should apply rigor, thinking, science to it to make sure that it's actually driving value for the business. Otherwise, it's reckless. So again, I'd really encourage everyone to register for these events. It's on the 12th of October, 19th, 26th of October in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and then Adelaide on the 2nd of November. I will be running them myself. We'll be going into more detail and giving you some takeaway templates on how to actually track the ROI from your initiatives. So I highly encourage you to come, even if it's just for the coffee and networking. It's going to be a really fun event. And yeah, it's probably the most important event that you will attend this year. Great. Well, if there's any questions, now is the time. We're live streaming. Any question is open. So yeah, otherwise I will wrap up in a couple of minutes. Thank you, everyone that's been watching. I really appreciate the time that you've taken out of your day. It's a Friday, so thank you so much. Great. All right. Well, I think we'll close it there.